Hey everybody, welcome to the Pesty Podcast. Today I'm joined by someone who knows the pest control industry inside and out, Eric Bassett. With 18 years in the industry, Eric has done it all from knocking doors in door-to-door sales back in 2008 to leading high-performing sales and marketing teams at companies like Rent-A-Kill and Natura Pest Control. He's the owner and vice president of Natura Pest Control, an associated certified entomologist, and the host of the Bug Bucks podcast, where he helps pest control business owners scale with smart sales and marketing strategies. Beyond running his own company, Eric is also an industry consultant and fractional CMO, helping pest control companies optimize their growth. If you're looking for insights on sales, marketing, team building, and scaling your pest control business the right way, this episode is packed with value. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andrew. Super glad to be here. I'm glad you reached out.
I appreciate you doing this. Eric, you and I before the pod were doing some brainstorming to figure out how do we pack in as much value as possible based on your expertise. And I mean, you've done a lot, so there's a lot of directions that we could go. But what we ultimately landed on was a topic that was similar to something I spoke about recently, right? It was really about processes and frameworks for setting yourself up for success before you work with a marketing agency. And I think that's a super important topic because anyone who is listening to this podcast inevitably has been burned once, twice, 3 times, hopefully no more than that, by marketing agencies. And it's not just an industry like pest control problem. I mean, this is a prevalent issue regardless of where you go, and especially for small businesses and operators who, marketing is not their domain. So let's at a high level kind of walk the audience through what your process is, because you do this kind of work with your own clients, and then we can start at the beginning and go into detail.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I love that you bring up the fact that companies get burned. If you haven't been burned yet, that's great. Odds are that you have been burned by a marketing company, once, hopefully no more than once. But a lot of guys are once bitten, twice shy when it comes to marketing, which is really unfortunate because having a high-performing marketing partner in your pest control company, in your service home company, or whatever the situation is, can be very, very useful for scaling and growth. And a lot of times I'll get guys that reach out to me and they're like, Eric, we want to take our company to whatever the next level is, 1 million, 5 million, 10 million, 20 million. And usually if they're in the 5 to 10 million range, they've got a marketing partner already. You don't see a lot of companies that are in that range that don't, but I do find a lot of companies that have had a bad relationship with their marketing company in those ranges. Usually we sit down and we start having what we call a discovery call, right? And they say, hey, I want to achieve this, Eric, how can we pull it off? How can you help? And I start asking them my very long series of questions about, what their company is, what their goals, their missions, their vision, their value, what their service offering is, their pricing, what their inside sales looks like, all the different details that I fully understand what their company's trying to accomplish. And then we kind of move into the marketing piece of it. And some of these companies already have a marketing company. That's great. And sometimes they have data. That's cool too. In fact, if it's good, reliable data, that's great. If it's not really reliable, that's tough. But either way, what we want to identify is what their marketing goals are. Hey, how many customers do you want to grow by? And in order to figure out how many customers you want to grow by, we have to kind of do some reverse math and figure out what your closing rate is, what the conversion to recurring customers are going to be. If you want to grow by volume, we have to figure out what your average contract value is, what your recurring value is, initial service value, one-time service, all those things. And so we identify those bits and pieces first. And then once we have an idea on the customers and maybe the leads that we want to get, sometimes I'll ask a generalized, hey, what's your budget? How much do you want to invest here? And how much are you willing to invest? And sometimes companies have earmarked parts of their previous revenue that they're going to invest in marketing. That's great. I highly suggest that. The percentages vary, and there's a lot of industry statistics on the, hey, 5% for this, 10% for that of your gross revenue. We won't dive too far into those numbers because it really depends on the company. But that's kind of where we bring the marketing company into the picture, because without their information about the market, about their information about leads and what kind of campaigns they're going to be running, it doesn't really go very far to set goals for lead volume and for budgets without the marketing partner. Those first elements is important. And then we have the conversation with the marketing partner and we say, hey, this is the market we're looking at. This is the kind of growth that we're trying to aim for. This is the number of leads, the number of customers we want to get. We've done all the back end work on how much revenue it should give us. Can you guys help us understand what type of potential this market has? Now, Andrew, you probably know that you can't just eyeball a market and say, oh, hey, I think we can probably pull you, 5,000 leads or 2,500 leads, right? But marketing companies typically have some type of process where they might be able to look at it and give you somewhat of a ballpark, right? Hey, here's what I think we could accomplish from this. Here's how much it'll likely cost for us to do that. And I like to push my marketing company and say, hey, give me the extremes, right? Like, be comfortable, but if money wasn't an issue, how many leads could we squeeze from this market and how much would it cost? And they'll usually come back with a number, both of leads and money. And that gives us our, overall cost per qualified lead. And then I ask the client, hey, how much of this pie do you want? How big of a slice do you think that you've got an appetite for, right? Because just because a market can give you 3,000 leads at whatever the cost per qualified lead is, there's a sweet spot of efficiency there. And also your operation might not be available to scale that quickly. You
have to have the infrastructure in place.
100%, right? You got to have the technicians, you got to have the sales staff, you got to have the customer service staff, you have to have the other systems and processes in place. And, you take a company that has 1,000 accounts, right? And they're like, we want to triple in size, quadruple in size. That's a great idea. It's possible, but to scale that quickly is difficult, right? You want to quadruple in size within 1 year. That means that you're taking your company from 1,000 accounts to 4,000 accounts. And that's a significant increase in operational load. So
it's doable, right? But if you've never done it before, it's one thing, right? I mean, there's a lot of companies out there who they do that. They go out and they scale very quickly because they have the experience, they have the know-how, right? They understand the systems that need to be in place to make that possible. And again, it's not that you can't do it. In fact, I love working with operators who have that kind of mindset. Like, tell me I can't do something, I'm going to show you, we're going to go make it happen. But yeah, if you've never done it before, that's a tall order.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's just making sure that the operator is prepared and they understand the logistics behind scaling however fast they want to. So once we decide how much of that pie they want, whatever their appetite is, I usually go back to the marketing company and say, hey, here's what the client is prepared to make as far as an investment. Here's how many leads they want. Are you and I squared up on how much it's going to cost and what the investment is and what that lead number is? And that's the first agreement I'm looking to make. Now, everybody should know that marketing is not that clear cut, right? You make goals, you make informed decisions. Sometimes they're more like educated guesses, but there's really no way to know exactly how many leads you're going to get out of a market, exactly how much it's going to cost, when they're going to come in, how efficient it's going to be month by month. It is something that if you track that data over time, you get a really good idea of. But I've seen markets do really interesting things depending on the year, right? Especially being involved in the marketing side of the company over 2020 and before that and after that and all those other things. After we get the, agreement from the marketing company on the volume, the goals and everything else, we build a phasing calendar. And this is where we take, all the data that we have, if we've got any from previous performance, along with everything that we're trying to accomplish this following year. And I ask the operator, hey, based on how much call volume you're getting, how many leads you've had in the past, the demand that you see for your service month to month, let's try to make some educated guesses on how much of that lead volume is going to occur during those months. So for example, you might see that bell curve, right? Where it's slow in January and February and November, December, but between that, it kind of goes up, it peaks in the middle of the year and then kind of phases off, right? So January might represent 3 to 5% of the lead volume. And it slowly increases until you hit maybe, June, July, August, where you're sitting somewhere between 10 and 13, 14%, right? Every company's phasing is a little bit unique. And the longer that you track that phasing, the more accurate it typically is if you're sticking with the same aggressive level of marketing, right? And so once you know your phasing, you can multiply that percentage by your overall lead goal for the year, and it'll tell you how many leads you're likely to get. And I say likely because, again, it's not a direct science, how many leads you're likely to get during that month. And then if we've already kind of agreed on what the generalized cost per lead is, that also delivers our budget that month too. And one thing that it's been nice for our marketing partners is there's no guesswork. They know what our budget is the next month. They know how many leads we want to get, how much we're willing to invest. When I have meetings with these marketing companies, they double check. They say, hey, here's been our performance. How do you feel about next month's budget? Do we want to increase the budget based on there being room to capitalize? Do we want to make adjustments here or there? And we also obviously look at some of the stuff that Andrew, I'm sure you can talk on too, some of the marketing side performance-based metrics, right? So, we look at all the different campaigns we're running, whether it's, PPC, LSA, sometimes you run stuff on LinkedIn or Bing or whatever else is hitting in your market. And we look at what the investment is, how many conversions we've got. We get a cost per conversion number from that. And then we kind of track how effective those campaigns are. And I've always been a big fan of testing out different things and then slowly, progressively moving more of the budget into what is hitting the best. But you don't want to be afraid of something, especially if you've never tried it, right? Test it out, put some money into it, see what happens, and go from there.
Cool. So guys, at a high level, that is what we are now going to double click into and really, unearth some of the gold nuggets that Eric has to drop with us. But I mean, even if you walk away with nothing else than that right now, you stop the podcast. I mean, that is still a better process than any pest control operator I've ever spoken with, when they're looking at how do they set themselves up for success when it comes to marketing. And starting from the beginning, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, it's setting goals, right? It's knowing what do you actually even want to accomplish? And that's where I start I start that conversation. That's the first question I ask. And before even the audit and discovery, is the term you're using. And it's essentially a discovery. What we do, we call it an audit and solutions plan. But I asked that question on the intro call. I'm like, you called us, you obviously want to accomplish something. Tell me what your goals are. And whether the company is doing 1 million a year, a few million a year, I would say in that range, the lower end of anything below 1 million a year, I pretty much never get someone who knows what their goals are. They rarely have goals in place. Once you start getting into the 1-3 million per year, I would say it's like a 70-30 chance that they have goals. Like 30% of them have goals, 70% of them do not, right? And so that's an opportunity for your marketing agency, or in this case for you, to really dig in and if you understand the market well, start to do that math with them, right? And educate them about, because they want to know, what kind of goals should I set? And then you can dig into that with them. Let's talk about what you want to do and accomplish in terms of growth. So what does your goal setting process look like? And right, so I'm doing, let's say, couple million a year. I come to you and I say, I want to grow, right? I want to grow. I don't want to lose my ass on growth. We can curse a little on here. It's okay. But I have ambitious growth goals. So where do you start?
Yeah, I think the first thing is maybe making sure that the client understands some key philosophies about growth and marketing. The first one is the faster the growth, typically the more expensive it is. If you want to scale a lot quickly, then you're putting money behind it. And me and you were talking about this before we hit record, talking about our days in door-to-door. And door-to-door is a way that you can scale very, very quickly. You've got enough money. I mean, you can hire sales reps and they can put on thousands of accounts. And there are companies that go from 1,000 accounts to 5,000 accounts in one summer. I mean, the growth is ridiculous, but it's crazy expensive. And so I try to understand what their appetite is when it comes to the goal. Right? Okay, you want to grow, that's great. By when, And I am a big fan of the 40X model, the 4 disciplines of executions. And in the book, they outline the growth, or I'd say the goal setting model as, where are you at now? Where do you want to be? Sometimes it's helping clients understand that I appreciate their growth goal. Like I appreciate the tenacity and the appetite and the drive. I want to make sure that they understand what it takes to get there. So the faster the growth, more expensive it's typically going to be. When it comes to kind of honing in on maybe digital marketing, the next philosophy that I share with them is the quality, the volume, and the price of leads you're going to get. It's kind of these 3 different levers. And you can have 2 of the 3, but you typically can't have all 3. And if you do have all 3, you're not going to have them for long. So we'll give some examples, right? If I have a lead that has high quality, right, which means that customer calls in, they have high intent, they've got an issue that I can solve, they're ready to buy, they're good with the price, they have discretionary income to spend on pest control, high quality lead, perfect. If I'm getting a high quality or a high quantity of those high quality leads, it's not going to be cheap. okay? In order for me to get all of the leads that are high quality, I'm going to probably be spending a lot of money because marketing in a digital space is pay to play. And there are other players in that space that are vying for what you're trying to get, right? And you do not get a break on the cost when you try to go by volume like you get anything else. If I'm okay with sacrificing the quality of lead, right? So for example, let's talk about maybe lead sharing platforms, Angie, Thumbtack, stuff like that, right? The quality of lead might not fit exactly what I'm looking for. Maybe I get a hold of them, maybe I don't. Maybe they frustrate my sales team, whatever, right? Quality of lead goes down. Quantity of lead can go up though, which is great. And the cost is probably pretty good too. So I'm getting good on cost. I'm getting good on quantity. Quality, not so much. Sometimes, again, you might get all three. So when LSA first came out and I signed up for it quickly,
let's talk the golden days.
Right, the golden days, yep. All of a sudden it was like, wait a second, like I'm getting high quality, I'm getting a good quantity of leads, and the cost isn't too bad. This is great, right? It doesn't last. Because as soon as you find something that's really good like that, other people are going to find it and eventually it balances out, okay? Sometimes you get these PCOs that are like, I want to have this many leads, but so-and-so told me that I could get them for whatever dollars per lead. And I'm like, that's not realistic, unless you want your sales team to be completely spinning their wheels every single time they talk on the phone and busting their brains trying to close deals that are just crap leads, And I try to explain to PCOs how much of an impact having crap leads come in the door really is on your team, because not only does it lower morale because their closing rate takes a dive, their conversion rate takes a dive, but it's also tying them up. It's tying up phone time with leads that aren't going to convert, they're not going to close, and you don't want your sales team working on that stuff. There's a little bit of a balance there that you strike with those levers where you're like, okay, I want quality and I want quantity, but how much cost am I cool with putting into this thing, right? And sometimes I've told my marketing company, hey, like I do want a little bit more volume. Try to find me the best quality leads that you can without really scratching the bottom of the barrel here, and see what we can do as far as improving our cost per qualified lead. So that's kind of the next thing that we talk about. And then once we have that stuff kind of dialed in, again, it's kind of going to the marketing company and saying, hey, we're flexible. We're open to whatever your recommendations are as far as types of campaigns. I'm very flexible when it comes to what amount of that budget goes into each campaign. I don't want to be a micromanager for the marketing company. I don't want to be like, hey, I want 50% in PPC. I want 25% in LSA. I want,
You're hiring them for their expertise to do that marketing mix in the way that is the most efficient.
Exactly. So don't micromanage your marketing company. If you're going to pay a marketing company, let them do their thing, right? Give them the money, get out of their way, and let them do what they do best.
Right. Which also goes back to having a process in place for hiring the right marketing company, right? Because you can give anyone a whole bunch of, a big budget and say, spend it however you think it should be spent. And a lot of marketing companies are not going to spend it particularly well. They might have ideas, but ultimately you need to make sure that you are vetting the marketing agency appropriately so that once you get to the point where you are giving them a really specific budget and letting them know what they're going to be held accountable to, or letting them tell you what they need to be held accountable to based on their own projections, it really comes down to finding the right partner. So you're setting up these goals, and you've gotten to the point where you're saying, okay, you've gone to them. They are giving you an idea, a range, right? A high and a low of what the cost per lead could be. And that's going to be based in part on the volume of leads that you want. Are you working... Let's take a step back. So what size client in terms of top line revenue are you typically having these conversations with? Are these 1 to 5? Because you mentioned earlier, 1 to 5, 5 to 10. So it sounds like you have a pretty good mix of clients that you work with.
Yeah, the bigger the companies, typically when you go below that $1 million mark, you don't find a lot of people that are really jumping into growth. They might have their own marketing person, doubtful. They probably have a marketing partner. They don't have a chief of marketing, or they probably definitely wouldn't be typically hiring a fractional chief marketing officer. Yeah, you get into like the 2 to 3 to 5 up to the 10 million. North of 5, that's where people usually bring in their own in-house marketing professional, even if they have a marketing partner, which I think is a great idea, by the way, because I like my position being the kind of between person. I can be the guy in the company that has their ear looking at everything that's really important for the business. And then I can share that information with the marketing company at a very efficient and high level. Marketing company can focus on what they want to, and the business owner can focus on what they do best. So having a marketing officer doesn't mean that you don't have a marketing partner or marketing company. It just means that you've got a dedicated person that's going to be having those conversations with your marketing company. So I think that's really important.
So you're generally working, it sounds like, with companies doing between a couple million or up to like 10 million. You're kind of breaking into the PCT top 100.
Yeah, north of that, you have companies that are north of 10 million. They have their own full-time chief marketing officer. They're not really looking for a fractional version of it. There are some progressive companies that are very fractional, and they're very, I don't want to say like a skeleton crew because that sounds bad, but they're just more progressive on that side of things. But yeah, somewhere 1 to 10, we can probably call it that range.
So the budgets, when you're talking about setting goals with your clients, with a pest control company, they're doing between 1 to 10. There's probably a similar kind of bell curve, right? Where with the clients you have where they're doing, closer to like the 5 or maybe a little less mark. What kind of budgets, like what's the high end, low end of the budgets when a company is doing, let's say around like a few million, 5 million per year in revenue, where they want to grow ambitiously, but not get over their skis?
Yeah. So the first thing is there are marketing companies you can do it in a couple different ways. So if you have no data, then one thing that you can do is go off of your percentage of gross revenue month by month, and then take a percentage of that and say, hey, just best guess here, we're going to say you're investing 10%, anywhere from 5 to 10% of your trailing 12 months revenue from last year into this next year's marketing budget. Then we say, hey, we're going to guess on the phasing because we don't have any data, and we're going to run with that and go for it based on revenue we collected. What I really like to do is hopefully the client has some data from the leads they brought in, because gross revenue that you collect month by month does not necessarily follow the same path as leads that come in month over month, right? Your revenue can be a lot more flat, especially companies now that have subscription-based billing. Your revenue can be a lot more flat over the course of the year, but the lead volume that comes in has a lot more of a bell curve because that's based on pest activity, demand in your market, other things. So if they've got that data, then that's great. The next thing I look at, for example, I've had companies, so you have like a $3 million company and they're like, hey, we've got earmarked 10%. We've got a $300,000 marketing budget. We'll take a peek at what their marketing expenditure was the previous year, how many leads they brought in from that, and then we'll try to phase it up. We'll say, okay, perfect. Say we did, 250,000 last year. Phasing up to 300,000, that's probably not that big a deal. Then it's kind of up to the marketing company, hey, if we're going to maintain our overall cost per qualified lead that we had last year, and we're going to bump this marketing budget up to 300,000, do you think that this market is capable of delivering that, right? Or are we going to be spinning our wheels? Are we going to be underspending every single month trying to hit a number? Are you guys feeling pressure to invest into campaigns that aren't really delivering very much?
Past the point of diminishing returns.
Exactly, right? And so that's another really good point to have a conversation with that marketing company, because people, and that's why I think it's funny when people say, oh, it should always be X percent of your gross revenue. And I'm like, well, you're telling one side of the story, right? While you could invest that much of your gross revenue, what you're trying to do is find the sweet spot, find the amount that you can get a good return on investment from your market within the range that you want. And it depends on your appetite. I've talked to pest control companies that are crazy hungry. Like in the meantime, while they're trying to do digital marketing, they're actively looking for acquisitions. They will pay up to 90% of what that account's worth just to get it, right? I mean, a lot of those companies have maybe some agreements with private equity, and so they're looking for an exit, and other things kind of come into play. But typically, there's a sweet spot you're trying to hit. Whether you're a $5 million company or a $10 million company, that market can only produce so much at that sweet spot of efficiency. And if we max out on that, if we cap out, then the next thing we talk about is, hey, what markets near here can we expand to, and what is the potential there? And then we end up having the whole conversation all over again, right? Hey, here's the marketing company. What can we do? How much do we want to spend? What's the cost per lead? What's our potential here? And that's how you build and scale through different markets. And hopefully you find a market that's relatively close so you can share some resources, but that's not always the case.
Yeah. So we've set some goals with the client. They've talked about it either as in terms of growth year over year, or in terms of a budget that was earmarked based on revenue from the previous year. And now what are we getting into next?
So I think the next part is going to be kind of measuring performance. So I prefer to have meetings with clients probably every other week. Every other week is a pretty good sweet spot because it gives you a chance mid-month to have a conversation where you evaluate performance and you can still make changes, kind of, right? That's another thing you need to know is that marketing takes a little bit of time, especially the beginning. When you're trying to really start new campaigns, there's a learning curve. There's a period of time where those campaigns are not going to operate the way that they're supposed to until they have a chance to really get to know what you want and what the market is like, right?
And to double click on that, right? So for anyone listening, Eric, I think what you're talking about, at least in large part, is the algorithms that you're working with, right? Because Google, for example, uses the previous 30 days of data, right, to optimize the algorithm that they're running, assuming you have automated bidding, right, in place. And so the first 30 days, let's call it even the first 90 days, it's going to be the most efficient ad spend like you basically ever have. And depending on your budget and how many leads you're trying to get, your ability to get that campaign or get that account to be efficient could also, happen more or less quickly, right? Because if you're working with a small budget, you're giving Google less data. The algorithm's ability to go out and find you more high quality leads at the volume you're hoping for, can be made more difficult. I know I'll be curious about your experience on this. So in our experience, we have seen really great returns, like where our clients are, we have enough data that the algorithm is super optimized and where we can put in place like a performance max campaign to drive that, cost per lead down while not sacrificing too much on quality at about $20,000 per month. Like that seems to be where Google starts to get really happy about the data that you're giving it, right? And that is of course assuming you have like good conversion data in place, right? Clean data, which I know we're going to get to. Below that, I mean, you can still have an efficient campaign. We, over the last year, have kind of figured out that we don't really like to run Performance Max campaigns. And guys, Performance Max is Google Ads' latest attempt at making running ads as easy as possible while advertising throughout its entire inventory. So email, YouTube, banner ads, they kind of take away a lot of control through automation, get your advertising everywhere. And in our experience, when you spend, like I said, around that $20,000 mark, your cost per conversion can come way down through that kind of campaign. Quality tends to suffer a little bit, but we have not had success like just throwing out a Performance Max campaign when the budget's like 5,000, even 10,000, it just seems to really struggle to perform well. So yeah, to get into some of the data, like because you're kind of overseeing some of that, right, to hold the agency accountable. So what do you see? And obviously I'm talking specifically about Google Ads here. So would love to hear your thoughts on the data and optimization and efficiency.
Yeah. And I exactly what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Depends on the market a little bit. You're going to see, like if you take three companies kind of within the same market, you're going to see typical numbers there. Go into a different market, different set of companies, maybe a little bit different numbers. But overall, when you give Google a really minimal amount of money to spend, it has minimal opportunities to really find you leads at the amount that you're wanting to do, right? Google is an advertising company. Like they want to bring you leads. That's what they want. They want to bring you leads so that you'll be willing to spend more money, so that their customers and people that are actually searching for services keep coming to them. When you win, they win, right? I'll tell companies sometimes, they're like, hey, we want to reduce our budget to X. And I'm like, hey, like this is going to there's not a linear impact here. Like you're not going to see the same cost per lead performance here. You're not going to see the same lead volume, here. Like if you reduce by that much, then we're going to see a significant impact. And then because the algorithm has that effect, reducing in a heavy amount one month and then just jumping all the way back up to whatever the normal amount was the next month does not offset things. It creates, discontinuity in the algorithm on what Google thinks that you want. And you will see an increase in leads when you bring your budget back up. But I always try to remind the client to aim for consistency. And that's why we figure out these budgets ahead of time, preferably from an earmarked amount that is not reliant on the current year's performance. If you have a client who's like, hey, yeah, if we do really well this month, then I'll put this money towards marketing. But that's a tough way to do it, right? Because then we're relying on the sales team, we're relying on other stuff, the profitability of the services you're putting on, the collection rate from your clients. I don't want to deal with that. So the consistency is really good. And finding, again, that higher budget amount that yields the best results for you. Just like you said, sometimes when your appetite is high and you're willing to spend that, you're going to get some leads that aren't the highest quality. Like we say, like if you're fishing, good bait catches lots of kinds of fish. Might not be the fish that you want, and that's okay. But if you're really trying to get a lot of fish, then that's what you deal with. So the amount does matter. Glad that you bring that up. The other thing I was going to mention is, during these meetings when we're talking about the performance, that's where it really is crucial to be speaking the same language as those marketing companies, because this is where I see PCOs just fall off. Like they're like, I don't know what cost per conversion means. I don't know what impression or ranking, or
I don't even know what a conversion is. Like,
like
making sure you've defined what a qualified lead is, like all those things. Totally.
Yeah. So, for me, I'll tell the PCOs, hey, like we're going to define a qualified lead as number one, someone who has a pest issue that we can solve. And number two, someone that's in our service area. And maybe number three, and this is a really finicky one, someone that's actually a decision maker. And what I mean is someone that has the authority to make the decision. Like husbands and wives are the same. They can definitely make the decision. Don't let that fool you.
Like renter,
yes,
right, versus homeowner.
Yeah, renter, executive assistant for their boss, or someone who's whatever. But basically what it comes down to is a qualified lead is someone that you have a genuine, bona fide opportunity to close new business on. And so I have their inside sales team track those numbers. And sometimes the marketing company will come back and say, hey, we got 200 conversions. And the inside sales team says, hey, we got 50 or 100 qualified leads. And we know that the conversion to qualified lead is a 2-to-1 ratio. And so if we're trying to make conversion goals and we know what our lead goals are, then we can do the reverse math and figure that part out, right? But typically we'll follow the qualified lead goals for the PCO because that's what makes sense to them. They understand picking up the phone and quoting a customer. And so during the month in those meetings, I'll say, hey, here's our qualified lead goal. Here's the percentage that we are to that qualified lead goal. Here's the percentage that we are through the month, through the selling days that we have. And then we check and see if one's ahead of the other. If my qualified lead goal is ahead of the percentage through the month, dude, we're cruising, right? Hey, we're definitely going to hit our goal. At least it looks like it. That's how the projection is. We're doing well. Then we also look at our budget spend. If our budget spend is ahead of the monthly phasing, then we have a couple options. If we keep the budget the same, we're probably going to run out and we might not hit our lead goal, even though we're phased ahead. That's kind of the conversation I like to have mid-month where I say, hey, we're doing well on lead volume. We're doing well on cost per qualified lead. We're seeming like we might run out of budget. Let's consider capitalizing on this and increasing the budget in the last few weeks that we have of the month, right? It's not going to make maybe the biggest difference, but at least we're not going to run out of budget, and that'll be really important. Some of the tough conversations we have are when we are overspending on budget, so we're phased over, and we are underperforming on qualified lead volume, which usually means that we're also underperforming on cost per qualified lead. And in that scenario, we see whatever we can do to make some adjustments to campaigns, to lead quality, but typically it's mostly a marketing conversation. I'm not usually having the sales revenue conversation, which is a sales team performance convo, right? I do have those conversations, just not typically with the marketing company, because I want to have the marketing company 100% focused on marketing performance. I don't want them feeling the weight of the sales team. That's not their responsibility, right? So we have those meetings, and then that way we can make sure that we're on par, on pace throughout the year.
When you have those meetings, do you have a framework for dissecting what's working and what isn't, and what you need to double click on to troubleshoot?
Usually it's a conversation that we have frequently with a marketing company. So if we know, like for example, part of the information that we gather is cost per conversion, which is a typical efficiency and effectiveness metric for marketing companies, right? If we're spending X amount of dollars and we're getting these many people who are coming through this campaign that look like they're leads, they're converting, right? And we're seeing that it's really efficient. If the efficiency is good and the volume is good, then that's usually where I say, hey, this thing looks like it's hitting. Maybe we should adjust some of our spend in that direction. And good marketing companies come prepared with that information to the meeting, right? They say, hey, here are the numbers. This is what I would suggest doing is allocating more budget in this direction. This other campaign, it's not hitting quite well. I might suggest maintaining that budget just to see where it ends up and maybe, adding investment in this other campaign. That's why it's important, again, let your company do what they do best. If your marketing company is going to make suggestions about what they think is hitting well and the information that they're getting from research that they're doing, follow that. A lot of PCOs, before they hire a marketing company, I say a lot, half, maybe some, do marketing on their own, some version of it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so they think that they know all there is to know about LSA and PPC and Bing and whatever other campaigns you run. For me, I learned a long time ago that I cannot be glued in on what the marketing industry is doing. The marketing industry in itself, digital marketing, that's a completely separate thing. It's a huge machine. There's a lot of different things, updates to Google, changes to the algorithm, right? That's why it's important to pay a marketing company to stay up to date on those things. So when I come to these meetings, I say, hey, what do you recommend? And they say, I recommend X, Y, and Z. And I say, great, let's execute on it. And in our next meeting, we'll see what the results are.
So a framework that if you're a longtime listener of the pod, and you've heard me talk about this at least a couple times, that I always go back to with my team and with our clients is, if something isn't working, if we're not seeing the results we want to see, and we're search focused, right? So Google ads, Bing ads, SEO, that's where we really, but both local SEO, Google Map Pack, and also organic search. We always go back to a framework that is going to be consistent across every platform, which is a 40-40-20 framework. Have you heard of this?
I think I've probably heard of something similar.
Yeah. So the idea is that 40% of the success of your direct marketing campaign is going to come down to the list, right? Are you getting in front of qualified prospects? The next 40% of the success of the direct marketing campaign comes down to the offer. Once you get in front of those people, do you even have something that is compelling for them to take action on? And also putting yourself in the shoes of a savvy consumer, which most are, who's doing their research, right? And comparing what you have to bring to the table compared to your competitors who they are researching you against. So you've got the list, the offer, and then the last 20% is the creative. And a lot of that is copywriting, right? Your copywriting is really your salesperson. And then some of that, of course, is also design and brand, right? Because if you're trying to charge a lot, if you have a premium price in your design and copywriting just kind of looks and sounds terrible, it looks amateur, that kind of incongruency is not going to work. But whenever we see things are not working, we kind of start there and figure out, like, how's our list? Are we getting in front of the right people? And there are always quantitative ways to measure that. Is our offer resonating? And if we look at the market and we do a side-by-side comparison of our offer versus everyone else, have we fallen way behind? And is everyone else offering some kind of discount or some service that is just outshining us? And then the creative, how is the copywriting portraying us? How is the design portraying us? And again, against our competitors, because the consumer has a lot of options. There are over 30,000 pest control companies in the country at this point. And of those options, they're probably going to narrow it down to a few that they're actually going to be willing to reach out to. And you want to make sure you're on that short list and have a really strong, compelling reason why they should choose you instead of someone else. So that's a framework we like to fall back on if something's not working, to try to figure out where we're going wrong.
Love it, dude. And it kind of transitions us into, evaluating some of the other things that are important to marketing that's not just paid advertising, right? I think a lot of pest control company owners think that consumers are kind of like government contracts, you know what I mean? Where they have to get a certain amount of bids and, they're going to spend all day calling pest control companies until they get the cheapest price. Dude, consumers, day-to-day consumers don't want to make more than one phone call. They really don't, right? They want to hop on, search for pest control near me, see the results, and find something that stands out to them. Something that reaches out and goes, hey, I'm probably the company that's going to meet your needs. And I kind of connect with your vibe and, what you like as a consumer. We call them wins in our sales teams. They're wants, interests, and needs, right? And it's different depending on the market you're in. For some markets, the local family-owned company is a big win, right? And if you have that and you leverage that and you have it built into your branding, then you can capitalize on it. So just like you're saying, kind of those little factors that companies in their branding can maintain and capitalize on, the copywriting, the creative. Are we really connecting connecting with the type of clients that we want? And are we making sure that we're not knocking ourselves out of it by having a typo or having some weird ad or having something that seems too salesy or whatever the situation is, right? And don't make it hard on yourself. Digital marketing's tough enough already, without the mistakes. But sometimes I'll get the question from clients where they say, hey, they want to redo my website, or they want to charge me X for SEO, or they want to manage my GMB, or whatever it is. Like, should I do that? And 99% of the time, my answer is yes. Because again, you're paying a marketing professional to comb through your website and make sure that your brand continuity is there, that the website works the way it's supposed to on desktop, on mobile. You're also making sure that everything in your offer is streamlined and dialed out the way that it's supposed to be, right? That it actually works as a pipeline and a filter to bring interest to decision to business, right? And those elements are little things that make big differences, and they tie into how effective and efficient your campaigns are going to be. So like sometimes I'll look at campaigns and PCOs run and the cost per lead sucks and their lead volume's not great. And just like you said, when the performance isn't there, where do you go, right? We go back through all the underlying factors that actually influence how well these campaigns are going to work out.
Yeah. And I think one of the best, in fact, I would argue the single best exercise any pest control operator could do is to, in the market where they want to sell, type in pest control near me. And if you want to do this, if you're not in the market where you want to sell, there's a website called SERP, SERPAPI.com. And that gives you the ability to do a search from anywhere in the United States where you can type in pest control and you can see what results you get in that area. Let's just assume though that you're in the market that you want to be in. I'm in Austin. I go to Google, I type pest control near me. And what you want to do at this point is pull up all the different options that the consumers have. Pull up the ads, pull up the options in the Google business profiles, pull up whoever's ranking in organic search, and take a look at what you're up against. When it comes to like branding, it's like, what colors are everyone using? Like we just took on a new client where they are not at all differentiated on color. Like every company is green in their area except for a couple, right? And so I put all of these green websites side by side, and I'm like, you have 3 seconds to tell me like who does what and how well they do it. And you can't do it, right? Because at a glance, everyone just looks too similar. And then you look at the offer, right? And you literally put every element of everyone's offer in a spreadsheet and you place those side by side and you say, what happens when you pull away the brand, you pull away the colors, which offer actually looks the best? If you had nothing else to go off of, it's not you. Okay, well, you might have a problem, especially if you're a company that has no brand awareness and you're not really able to compete when it comes to reviews and online credibility. So really just comparing in every single way how you stand up against your competitors to figure out, are you differentiated enough? Do you have a compelling enough offer? Because if I have 60 seconds to make a decision and I can't clearly make a decision based on those 60 seconds on your website, I'm just going to hire the cheapest option, because why wouldn't I?
Yeah. Well, and again, like you're trying to connect with consumers in a way that is emotional. It's not always logical, right? Like if you don't give them something emotional to connect to, some like a color that they like, the way that you communicate your offer, some of those additional underlying elements, if you can't connect with them emotionally, they will connect the most logically they know how, which is going to be price. Because there's plenty of times when I've looked at a brand and I'm like, I want to do business with that brand. That's the company I want doing X, Y, and Z for me. I don't know how much they cost. And honestly, I don't care, because realistically, I know that all these different companies are going to be within the same range. Some of them are going to be more, some of them are going to be less. And I always kind of avoid the cheapest. That's kind of one of my rules. But whatever brand I feel like connects the most with me, and then I start asking some clarifying questions, right? So like you said, do the homework, do some side-by-side comparisons. And if you look at your own offer, you look at your own brand, and it's not even connecting with you, then it's definitely not connecting with your preferred type of customer. So that's huge.
So you've put goals in place, and I know we're probably running out of time here pretty quickly, but you've put goals in place. You've started to figure out like what metrics need to be measured. And then at that point, where do you go next?
So really, once you have those elements there, you just let the machine run, right? So you let your marketing company hit on the campaigns they're doing. Obviously, you already have all the budgets prepared month by month. You are prepared to increase the budget and capitalize on opportunities if they arise. And you have regular recurring meetings to check in on performance and have them make adjustments and recommendations if you need to. So really, all you got to do is kind of get out of the way and let the machine do its thing. On the back end, there is a whole other conversation that I have with my clients as far as inside sales performance, because that's a lot of my other background. And so that's where we make sure that they're generating enough revenue per lead that's coming in the door. And that's going to be a combination of closing rate converging to recurring business, average one-time service, average initial, average contract value. And so this comes up, which is super annoying for marketing companies, when the pest control owner says, we're not generating enough revenue, like our revenue's not good or our sales revenue sucks. And I'm like, that's not a marketing problem. I completely separate those two things, because once you intermingle those things, you now put the responsibility on the marketing company, which is not actually something they should take ownership over. So I have the marketing company conversation, and then I have the sales company situation conversation. And sometimes you have a sales team who completely blows it out of the water. Like they're killing it. They're doing great. The revenue is fantastic. And if the marketing company is struggling, I'm still having a very difficult conversation with the marketing company. Doesn't matter that the company revenue-wise is successful. That's great. Sales team's doing well. The marketing company has to hold up their end of the bargain. So I'm alleviating the marketing burden from the sales team, and I'm alleviating the sales burden from the marketing team, and I'm holding them both accountable to the performance that we have set up. When the end of the year rolls around, we get to look back over all the data and see where we ended up. First question I ask is, okay, based on the phasing that we guessed on or had an educated decision on, how close was it, right? It should be relatively close considering the budgets that you put in were according to that phasing, but you never know, it adjusts. So we see how close that was over the course of the year, budgets over and under, lead volume over and under, and then we start doing our projections for the next year. It's, hey, how much do we want to grow by? We have the conversation with the marketing company. We adjust the phasing so that it more correctly aligns with what we were able to do the previous year, and we adjust the budgets accordingly, and we hit it again and again and again. And the more years you do this, the more data you have, the more data you've got, the more it aligns, the more accurate it is, and the more successful you typically are. And eventually, again, you're going to hit a point where you kind of cap out on that market as far as how efficient those campaigns run. And that's a good time to start looking for expansion.
And I think something you've hit on here that is really important for people who are considering hiring a marketing agency or who have a marketing agency and you're wondering, are they doing a good job? Eric has consistently gone back to data, and making sure you have clean data. So, and what does that mean? It means you know how many leads you're getting. You know what percentage of those leads are qualified. You know what the cost per lead and cost per qualified lead is. And you're tracking that data over time. And your marketing agency expects to be held accountable to that data. Because this is how bad it is out there. I have only ever once in this industry taken on a client where they had good historical marketing data. And that's which is why they came to us, right? Because they're working with a marketing agency who wasn't properly tracking that data. So if you're working with an agency who is not tracking that data, huge red flag, because they should be enrolled in seeing you succeed and also in thinking long-term. And if they're thinking long-term and they expect your results to get better over time, then they have their own, I guess really it's an internal incentive, right? It's a long-term way of thinking about it that they want to be held accountable to the real numbers. That's not even getting into things like delineating between branded searches, right? And non-branded searches and only taking credit where credit is due, which is super important. It's a whole other conversation. But you really need to be working with someone who is tracking the data properly for you. And then if you ever part ways with them, they hand that data over to you on a silver platter. They don't hold it hostage, right? It's a big red flag if that's in your contract. So with our last couple of minutes here, can you give us an idea of what is the difference between operators and teams that really just kick ass and grow and those that probably tend to just shoot themselves in the foot and hold themselves back? What are a few of the things that you notice in terms of their behavior, in terms of their culture, anything else?
I think the biggest difference that I see with top performers and maybe mediocre performers is how well they're able to self-evaluate and hold themselves accountable to the data that we talked about, right? And so typically, we'll put out salespeople, for example. If a salesperson's closing rate goes down and we have a one-on-one meeting and I say, hey, how you doing? What's going well? What are your areas of opportunity? And we look at their closing rate, and I start to hear things like, yeah, the leads just aren't that great, or, I'm just dealing with this situation, like the economy's bad, whatever, right? They're looking outside themselves. They're blaming the circumstances. It's always something that they can't control, right? Because they don't want the added responsibility for improvement. High performers are always looking inward. They're never mentioning outside stuff. They're saying, hey, it doesn't matter what the economy's like. What changes can I make so that I maintain my performance, so that I hit the numbers that I need to? What kind of tips do you have for me, right? They're looking for feedback. They're looking for input. Same thing with PCOs. They don't make excuses. They look for ways to change, ways to adapt, ways to evolve. And they're okay looking at the data. In fact, they like looking at the data. They are comfortable looking at the data, good or bad. And it's even better when it's bad, because they hate blind spots. They're like, I want to know exactly how things are going so that I know how to improve, so that I know that my business is healthy, right? You don't want to have a scenario with a client or a pest control owner or any industry really that avoids it because they're scared of what they might find out, right? That fear will paralyze you and it will keep you from growing and scaling your company. So lean into the self-evaluation. Ask yourself the hard questions. Be willing to look at the data, and then be willing to make the tough choice for improvements on how to grow and scale your company.
So I think I could sum all of that up as leadership, right? Like because really, really great leaders take extreme ownership, of themselves and of their team, of the things that they're responsible for, of the people that they've surrounded themselves with, and of the results that they've asked, and whether or not they get those. Yeah, it is really. That's something I've learned over the last couple of years is, you can have all the tactics, you can have all the strategies, you can have all the things that have to do with, I guess, like the hard skills. But if you don't like that soft skill of leadership, of having some self-awareness, and then the grit to lead yourself out of trouble, to identify your blind spots and move forward, boy, it is absolutely the difference between top performers and those who just are going to consistently get mediocre results. Eric, this has been amazing. I feel like we could talk all day about this, and there's so many more questions that I want to ask you, but for the sake of giving you back the rest of your Tuesday, you have a lot on your plate. I'll call it here, and maybe we'll have you back on at some point when you have a little bit less going on, but I appreciate you making the time for us today.
Yeah, Andrew, this has been great. Awesome conversation, great questions, and I just love what you guys are doing to improve the industry. Appreciate you.
Thank you.